they tell the story of a woman who went to the bank to cash her check. And so she asked the cashier to do that, and the cashier, of course, cited the fact that it was the policy of the bank to ask for identification. There's a moment of silence, and finally the woman says, "But Jonathan, I am your mother." In the gospel, they're trying to make John into someone who is not. And so they ask, "Are you the anointed, the Christ, the Messiah, the prophet Elijah?" And he says, "No." And John then says, "I am the one who speaks the things of the Lord. I am preparing the way of the Lord." When God gave his name to Moses, we know that he gave him, he said, "I am," was his name. And John does a word play on that when he says, I am not," he says. So he refuses to assume the role of God. You know, this is a human struggle, trying to assume the role of God. We see it with Adam and Eve. When the snake asks, "If you eat of this fruit, you will be like God." And we know Adam and Eve's response. And then the story of Cain and Abel. Cain assumes that the role of God, and he kills his brother Abel. And when they were building the Tower of Babel, they wanted to build the tower so tall that it would reach heaven. And then they would be able to walk into heaven and to do it all on their own, not needing God. There are times we too sometimes would like to be like God. I think sometimes when we don't like the rules and the commands of God, we'd like to write our own, and we assume that we could be God. John recognizes who God is, and he also realizes his own relationship to God. When Jesus comes, he tells us he is the I am. He is God. And he uses all those phrases throughout Scripture. He says, "I am the good shepherd. I am the vine grower. I am the light. I am the word. I'm the bridegroom." And John tells us he is the lamp and not the light. He's the voice and not the word. He's the best man and not the bridegroom. The Scriptures, I think, are trying to teach us how to deal with that human struggle of being human in the presence of God, knowing who we are and knowing who we are not. You remember back some number of years ago when the 9 miners in western Pennsylvania were trapped in a flooding mine. They tried to tie themselves together so that they would help each other. And it took 5 long days to be rescued. And it was later, after they were rescued, that they had a service to thank God for saving them. At the ceremony, they placed 10 lamps around the altar. Even though there were only 9 miners, the miners insisted there be 10. They wanted everyone to know that they weren't alone, that God was with them. God was the one who rescued them. So Isaiah reminds us in that first reading, he says, "We rejoice in the Lord who frees the captives," and that we wouldn't forget the work of God and his presence among us. There's another story they tell of a woman who was perched very high on a bridge wanting to jump. And so they called out an officer, and the officer who came to the scene was afraid of heights. But she also knew that she would have to get close to the woman in order to help her. So she edged her way calmly along the beams to get to her, struggling with her own panic. Finally, she got close enough to be able to talk to the woman, and the woman agreed to come down with her. And the officer said later on, he said, "I certainly said many prayers asking for God's help." You know, the gift of love is not measured in size or beauty, but it's measured in sacrifice. And I think that's what John and the scriptures are wanting to teach us. God is among us, and he sacrifices to be with us.